What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so getting into Ultimate Spider-Man, or I guess really Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man, one thing I want to point out here is that in these video titles, I'm simply going to call these Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man, and Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and so on. Really, the origin story that we did is Volume 1, so this is more like Volume 2. But in truth, this was really just kind of called Ultimate Spider-Man. And then there was another series later on that followed this that was called Miles Morales Ultimate Spider-Man. But in order to avoid confusion between Ultimate Spider-Man Peter Parker and Ultimate Spider-Man Miles Morales, we're just going to call this Ultimate Spider-Man Miles Morales, so that way everything's pretty clear and pretty easy to follow. But the cool thing about this is that, again, the origin story, for those of you guys who are just joining us with regards to the whole Ultimate Spider-Man landscape, the Ultimate Universe was never designed to be this great, big, huge, grandiose thing like the main Marvel Universe. I mean, the main Marvel Universe was really kind of built by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, a handful of other writers and artists in the 1960s and 70s, and then it grew to what it is now, where it's just massive in scope, and you have the Avengers, and you have, Excalibur, and you have Alpha Flight, and you have, the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and the X-Men and so on and so forth. The Ultimate Universe was designed to be far more contained and much, much smaller in scale. And so the result is that when it came to the Ultimate Spider-Man stories by Brian Michael Bendis, the idea was to basically keep things relatively small, to tell these small volumes where characters would appear and then never be seen or heard from again, or else if they were seen, they were just in a containment cell or they were being held by S.H.I.E.L.D. or something along those lines. But it was very easy to digest and it was very, very easy to follow. And that's one of the reasons why the Ultimate Universe was relatively popular. But in the end, people still gravitated toward the characters that they thought of when they thought of Captain America, when they thought of Thor, and so on and so forth. Now, with regards to Miles Morales, Peter Parker was basically the recipient of a bite from a spider that contained the Oz formula. And again, the whole idea here in the Ultimate Universe was that Nick Fury, I guess Samuel Jackson Nick Fury if we want to call him that, Nick Fury was the original super soldier. And when the super soldier serum that was used on Nick Fury proved to be successful, it resulted in this great gold rush, more or less, for everybody to create their own super soldiers. And so that's where Wolverine came from. Wolverine was the recipient of Canada's attempt to create a super soldier serum, but along the way, they discovered a mutant gene that when activated would give people powers. And that was the origin of the mutant race in the Ultimate Universe. When it came to Spider-Man, you had a guy, Norman Osborn, who was basically trying to create a super soldier serum. And he created something called the Oz formula, and where he was going through and testing it on different spiders. One of these spiders bit Peter Parker, which led him to become Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. But following the course of his publication history, somewhere around 160 issues or so, which this is far shorter than that. I think Miles Morales' stories probably total in like maybe 30 or 40 issues. It's not really that long at all. But following the publication history of Peter Parker, he eventually died. And the reason was because Marvel was wanting to basically make way for a new Spider-Man. And that just made good sense. I mean, you had Ultimate Spider-Man Peter Parker, and then you had the main Marvel Universe Peter Parker. Why have two versions of the same character? Give us a new Spider-Man. And so that's what they did. They killed off Peter Parker, and they had a spider basically bite a new kid by the name of Miles Morales, who gained Peter Parker's powers, and then a couple of his own that Peter didn't have. For example, Miles Morales can administer this venom shock, which is basically kind of like an electrical impulse that basically shocks a person that's touching him or something along those lines. He can make himself invisible. He can camouflage himself, that kind of a thing. And so again, Miles was very much his own character, but the whole idea here, and really where the story begins to pick up, is we start to get into his uncle, Aaron Davis. Now, the crazy thing about Aaron Davis's character is that as interesting as he is, there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. It's not as clean cut as him just being a con man, but that's how he comes off. He comes off as a con artist, he comes off as a thief and a cheat, but he's actually a very capable guy. And the way this story unfolds is it's actually going to be a sort of a battle of allegiances, so to speak, for Miles Morales himself. But what ends up happening here is we actually pick up with Aaron Davis traveling back, or at least intending to meet the Tinkerer. Now, the Tinkerer is basically a character who creates devices. I mean, really, the Tinkerer was who we saw in the Spider-Man Homecoming movie that was working alongside Michael Keaton. The other half of this is that it also deals with the introduction of a new version of the Scorpion. And the reason why I say new version is because of the fact that in the Peter Parker Ultimate Spider-Man line of comics, in those stories, the Scorpion was introduced, but he was actually introduced as a clone of Peter Parker. The issue with this was that with Brian Michael Bendis writing the story at the time and wanting to create a new Spider-Man, it also made sense to give this new Spider-Man, Miles Morales, his own villains to face off against. And so what ended up happening is the Scorpion, as he appeared in the original Peter Parker stories in the Ultimate Universe, he was basically defeated. He was revealed to be a clone of Peter Parker, and then he was just never really seen or heard from again after he was taken captive by S.H.I.E.L.D. That was really it. This version of Scorpion seems to be more in line with the Scorpion that we saw from Spider-Man Homecoming. This Scorpion seems to be more grounded in terms of who he is and what he's about and that kind of a thing. His backstory still remains pretty ambiguous, and it will for a little while, but suffice it to say, he's basically in New York because of the fact that Prowler owes him cash, and that's really about it. Now, the other half of this is Miles Morales trying to make his way and trying to figure out how to be a superhero. But the other thing to focus on here is that Miles is struggling with the exact same thing that Peter Parker did. And that's one of the cool things about this, is that what Bendis and them are basically saying is that no matter what universe we're in, for the most part, unless the character is drastically different from who we're used to, he's always going to struggle with the same thing. Should he tell his friends and family who he is? And if he does, what are the consequences of that? Because remember, if he were to tell his mom, for example, that he's Spider-Man, she may believe him, she may not believe him. But if she has that knowledge, it makes her a target for somebody else. And so she basically can't spill the beans on something she doesn't know anything about. And if Miles never tells her, then nobody has any reason to go after her. They have no reason to connect the two people. Now, something else to focus on is that, again, when Bendis and them created Miles Morales, they didn't just abandon the concept of Peter Parker in his entirety. I mean, he's dead, he doesn't show up, and he won't show up again until Spider-Man. But the idea here was to keep the legacy of Peter Parker going. Genki really just kind of goes to Miles and says, look, it's cool that you're Spider-Man, but you don't really know what you're doing. And Peter Parker's not here to teach you what you need to know because he's dead. And so you need to be able to learn what Peter Parker knew from Peter Parker himself the best way you know how, which is to basically watch movies of Peter Parker fighting. And that's kind of the cool thing because, Miles gets a video, gets to watch footage of the Ultimate Universe Peter Parker facing off against Dr. Octopus, nothing too significant, but his first real attempt in trying to stand toe-to-toe and trying to really become Spider-Man comes with the arrival of a character by the name of Omega Red. Now, Omega Red in the Ultimate Universe was starkly different from his character in the main Marvel Universe. In the main Marvel Universe, Omega Red was the byproduct of the Russians trying to duplicate Wolverine. That's really all it was. It was the idea that Wolverine had been taken by the Weapon X project, his healing factor had been used in order to bond his body with adamantium, and the result was that he ended up going forward as just this adamantium-laced killing machine. The Russians tried to duplicate the same process, but the difference here is that the Russians didn't know the formula for adamantium, and so because of that, they ended up creating a cheap knockoff called carbonadium. Now, carbonadium's still pretty durable, and it's still pretty potent in terms of what it's capable of, but naturally, this eventually led to a battle of sorts between Omega Red and Wolverine, with the two of them becoming mortal enemies. In the Ultimate Universe, it was starkly different. Omega Red was basically just a guy who was a mutant. He gained these powers that allowed him to just kind of expand these organic tendrils from his body. He could emit toxins, different things like that, but he wasn't nearly as capable as his main Marvel counterpart. But the reason why this is important is because of the fact that for Miles Morales, going against somebody like Omega Red is going against someone he's never experienced before. And so it's really him kind of on the edge of his seat, using his powers as best he can, trying to become a legitimate hero, because with trying to dodge these tendrils and so on, it requires him to use basically every ounce of agility he has. As we would expect, he comes out on top. But the idea of Aaron Davis being rolled in as part of Miles Morales' Spider-Man story comes when, again, Aaron Davis basically encounters the Tinkerer. And it's the idea that the Tinkerer, when Aaron Davis is looking at this newspaper about a new Spider-Man and so on and so forth, the Tinkerer basically gives Aaron Davis the whole backstory of how Spider-Man became Spider-Man. The original Peter Parker became Spider-Man. Of course, as we talked about, Norman Osborn created the Oz formula, so on and so forth. But this also rings a bell for the Prowler, because remember, in our video on the origin of Miles Morales, he was bitten by a spider in front of Uncle Aaron Davis. And the result was that Aaron Davis saw the spider and saw a number on it. And so because of that, when, Tinkerer begins to explain all these things about what Osborn was doing, how he would perform experiments on these spiders, he would number them and he would catalog them in order to keep track of what his experiments were doing and how they were progressing, Aaron Davis comes to the realization that a numbered spider bit his nephew, and then suddenly there's this new Spider-Man on the scene. 2 and 2 together, Miles Morales is Spider-Man. And that's why I say that Prowler, Aaron Davis, is actually sharper than people give him credit for. I mean, he's smarter than your average bear, I guess. But it's kind of a cool thing because it sets the stage for this idea of Aaron Davis being brought in, asking for some pretty nefarious things. And that's really the first thing that he does. I mean, as soon as he realizes that Miles is Spider-Man, he goes to him and says, hey man, we should work together. We can put our efforts together and we can really achieve something great. Now, remember, Miles was informed by his father that his uncle Aaron was a con artist and a crook and served time in jail. Miles' father was heading down the same path. And so Miles' father had basically warned him, hey, look, do not get in the mix with your uncle Aaron. The other half of this is that Miles' father, I wouldn't go as far as to say is a very cautious man, so much as he's trying to ensure his son stays safe, but he's also a little overprotective. And this is where the whole element of loyalties begins to come into play. Because with Miles Morales, he's kind of stuck in two different situations. The first is that he believes in his father. I mean, it's his dad. You know, he follows his father as best he can, but it almost feels like his father's trying to shelter him from the world's experiences. And life in and of itself, people growing and becoming something better than they are, is all about experiences, doing something stupid and learning from that experience. At the same time, it's his uncle Aaron Davis, and he knows that he's a crook, but if he wants to go out and experience life, there's a lot of different ways to do that, but family is family, blood is blood. And so again, that's one of the interesting things about this story, and that's one of the reasons why I've loved Miles Morales' character for so long, is because it's just the inner struggle between the two of them. Now, with regards to Aaron Davis having killed the Tinkerer so that nobody would know about the possibility of Miles Morales being Ultimate Spider-Man, it also comes into play with him, I guess, re-encountering Scorpion again. And this is when we basically learn that Scorpion was owed money by Aaron Davis, that presumably Aaron Davis essentially cheated him out of cash. Scorpion comes back looking for his money. Now, the other half of this is that we also get some perspective in terms of what Scorpion's capable of. And what we're actually informed here is that he's not just some crazy guy, you know, who is a mob boss out of Mexico. Instead, he does have some abilities. And one of the most notable is a highly resistant skin. Aaron Davis ultimately just ends up fleeing for his life when he begins to realize just how capable Scorpion is, and that he's not really a pushover. Now, of course, this leads to exactly what we would expect it to, in the sense that Aaron Davis essentially flees to his nephew, Miles Morales. And this is probably one of the best elements of the story. And the reason for this is because Aaron Davis approaching his nephew is done from ill intent. Like, it's him showing up and essentially having this ulterior motive. There's a guy trying to kill me, I want to try to take him out, so on and so forth. But he doesn't say that. He doesn't go to Miles Morales and say, hey man, I did something really bad. I screwed a guy over in Mexico and he got here to New York and he's trying to kill me. You got to help me take this guy out. That's not what he says. Instead, what he does is he pawns it off on the idea of being a tutor of sorts. And that's kind of the cool thing, because Aaron Davis uses, you know, basically the abilities of his suit combined with his own experiences to engage Miles in hand-to-hand combat. And this is why I say, sometimes, despite the fact that there can be nefarious purposes here, at the end of the day, there is still something to be learned. And so while Aaron Davis is trying to manipulate his own nephew, Aaron Davis is teaching Miles how to become a more effective fighter. Because remember, Miles doesn't have any martial arts training. He doesn't have military training. He has no kind of training at all. He's a kid who was bitten by a radioactive spider and then suddenly has all these powers. And so he doesn't know how to fight. He doesn't have any of that kind of training stuff. He's really just flying by the seat of his pants every step of the way in every single conflict he gets into. Now, the other half is to remember, he learns as he goes through. And that's kind of the cool thing, is because he's literally learning to fight while he's fighting. And so that's one of the crazy things about his character and his evolution. But the idea of Aaron Davis is saying, look, I'm trying to help you out here. Now, Aaron is not totally evil. Like, he's not a total bad guy. He's not just like, I don't care whether you live or die. I'm just trying to make sure that this guy Scorpion gets off my back. Instead, it's really this idea that he's going to him and he's saying, look, I don't want to see you killed. And that really is one of the reasons why Aaron Davis's character is so intricate and is so complex, is because on one half, he's a thief, he's a con artist, he's a manipulator, but at the other half, that's family. That's his nephew. The last Spider-Man was killed by his own enemies. It'd be a lot easier for Miles Morales to be killed by different foes because he doesn't have nearly the experience or the training that Peter Parker had. And so again, it's kind of a cool scenario. Now, of course, ultimately Miles is able to overcome Aaron Davis to the point that he proves that he's able to hold his own to a degree. And this is where the conversation begins to unfold, is because Aaron Davis basically says, I want to train you. I want to make you a good fighter. I want to turn you into somebody who can be a legitimate superhero. And this is why it's kind of this idea that these two characters have conflicting sides, where, you know, Aaron Davis is just kind of a small-time crook and a con man, and Miles Morales is trying to be a good guy. At the end of the day, they have a common goal, and the common goal is to take out an even worse bad guy named Scorpion. And so that's the common ground that the two of them reside on at this moment. It allows the characters to sort of progress and to grow and so on and so forth. And so where we ultimately have Miles just kind of cruising the internet and trying to learn about this Scorpion character, and we eventually have him just sort of mulling this entire situation over, and then ultimately agreeing to side with his uncle Aaron against the wishes of his parents after learning that this guy Scorpion has engaged in acts of racketeering, murder, theft, violating other human beings. This guy is just a genuinely terrible human being. And so because of that, you know, ultimately Miles ends up siding with his uncle, which again sets the stage for some pretty cool stuff. But with that being said, guys, if you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know how you guys feel about Miles Morales' character. I know some people love him. I know some people just don't like him. They prefer, you know, the classic Peter Parker. There's nothing wrong with that. But let me know how you guys feel about Miles Morales, because he's always been one of my favorite characters. Really more because I could identify with Miles Morales more so than I could with Peter, just because of Miles Morales' experience and where he is and, you know, his parents and so on and so forth. But anyway, guys, I'm going to go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.